So I'm watching CNN last week, and they had a guy on who you might have heard of him before. His name is Pete Dominick. He's a very talented and funny comedian. He's been a contributor on MSNBC. He's on CNN. He's worked with Jon Stewart. He's worked with the Colbert Report. And I want to play for you this exchange that he had with Scott Jennings, because it proves everything that I've said about Scott Jennings. Just have a listen to this.
The wars in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the Republican policies that led to those wars, the idea that Joe Biden made the final difficult decision, and his administration and his military leaders. I mean, you guys live on the tippy top of bullshit mountain if you actually think that so many people think that the pullout of Afghanistan was the pivot point. Are you kidding me?
Well, I mean, I can read a chart and I can read a poll. I guess you can't. But the reality is when he made that decision.
Your petty insults
when he made
are so weak, dude. You have no idea. Like, I don't even understand if you hear yourself talking. Look, you can laugh all you want, but like, I can't read a chart. Like, it's just so hacky. It's so uninteresting.
Look, the reason that we brought this up is because that was from a Democratic thing.
Yeah, he's right. It is so condescending. That guy is joining on the show right now. Very happy to have Pete Dominick, and I was happy also to see that he's a fan of this show, which means a lot to me. Pete, I do appreciate you coming on, my friend. How are you?
Dude, I discovered you like, I don't know, 6 months ago. And then you know how things work, like algorithms. Like once I clicked on you twice, they just fed me you every day. And I just love it because I'm like, oh, there's that Brian Shapiro. He's going to eat somebody alive. But more importantly, just not only is it entertaining, but just like your righteousness, your knowledge of the issues, your style debunks this idea that, you know, liberals are snowflakes and all that. And you're just really smart in the way that you run your show. I loved it. And I got a little jealous. I missed talking to the live callers because I hosted at SiriusXM for 12 years. And I thought at live radio is the best. So I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm really happy you invited me on, and I'm psyched to be here, man. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Pete. That really means a lot to hear somebody like you say that you've been doing this for a long time. I really appreciate that. Let's start with Scott Jennings, and then I want to talk to you a little bit about, you know, some of Donald Trump's hires over the past week. What is that like when you're sitting across from a guy like Scott Jennings live on CNN, millions of people watching, and he's so condescending to you? Like, what is going through your mind at that point?
Well, I'm an emotionally disturbed person, so it affects me, it triggers me. And like in therapy, I've worked on that moment between stimulus and response. But believe it or not, Brian, I've gotten nowhere near being good at handling that moment. So my reactions to, you know, that kind of ridiculous, I'm a stand-up comedian, or I certainly spent most of the first part of my career in comedy clubs with hecklers and other comedians. And I grew up around a lot of black guys. So like, I know how to heckle. I know how to, snap on people and all of that. I get the game, but I just, to be sitting next to such a hollow barrel and having him try to condescend to me was too much. I actually don't think I sounded very good. I wish I would have handled it differently, but I also needed to let him know that that's how I felt in that moment. But more importantly than any of that, the thing that you said, I disagree with. You said about Scott Jennings might believe this or that about, I think you said some economic issue, trade or something.
Taxes, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm like, there's a lot of guys, and we can talk about media, and I know more about that. It's the only place I'm an expert than anything else. Like Scott Jennings has no beliefs. His whole deal is to play that seat, that role on CNN and get paid. I mean, he hates Donald Trump. All those guys. I agree.
No, let me be clear, because maybe I wasn't. Pete, I agree with you 100%. I think many of these people, most of them are phonies. They bend into pretzels for Donald Trump. They know he's an awful human being. And you're absolutely right. Jennings lies on the air every single day. That's what they pay him to do. So I agree with you.
I also think that a lot of the men that kind of apologize and side with Donald Trump, and I'm certainly not casting any aspersions on Scott Jennings. I know nothing of anyone ever accusing him of anything. And I'm not saying this, but I think that when you can relate to or apologize to a man who you know has sexually assaulted dozens of women, sometimes I wonder if you're comfortable with that because you are that. And so I think that's I think people miss that a lot. Like if you really believe that guy isn't a serial sexually assaulting person, then I think maybe you don't know what sexual assault is, and maybe you yourself have sexually assaulted a lot of women, and maybe you feel bad about it because you know it's wrong, but it makes you feel a little better because you've done it before.
I think that's a good point you make. If you don't mind me asking, like when you guys are off the air, when that segment ends, does he say anything to you? Do you say anything to him? Is there anything that's said between the two of you after that?
First of all, you can ask me anything you want and I'll answer everything.
Thank you.
And second of all, no, he does. He looks at his phone. I look at him because I want to make sure. When I go into cable news television studios where I've worked for over 10 years and gone on those types of panels, I 100% go in, including the women at the table, whoever they are. I try to come in there as confident and as much of an alpha as I can. I try to be the alpha in the room because I know I'm not as smart as some of those people on certain issues. So I try to intimidate them with my own personality. So when those cameras come on, they know, not to come for me. And so you have to identify who the others are in that way, and you have to play that game. And so in my case, a guy like that looks down at his phone and doesn't look at you. He'll say something on the camera, but he's not consistent off. And
cowardly is the word that I would use. At a minimum, if you said, "Hey man, nothing personal. I know we disagree on stuff, but I appreciate the conversation," and he shook your hand, then maybe you'd have a little bit of respect for him, maybe a little bit.
I went in and I said hi to him. We know each other. I said, "Hey Scott," that was it. And then we don't say goodbye. And there's a lack of respect that I have for him. And I'm sure he probably feels nothing for me, but yeah.
Right. I'm trying to figure out like where they find some of these people. Like I'm trying to remember the guy, he's getting into it with Mehdi Hassan. Yeah. And he makes a joke about a beeper. And I know they threw him out, which CNN, I'm not blaming CNN for that. I'm blaming that douchebag for making that statement. But I'm like, where are we at as a country? Imagine the types of comments that they make behind closed doors when they're not on the air. I say the same thing about Donald Trump, right? The stuff he says at a press conference, at a rally, the enemy within, attacking Gold Star families, attacking women on looks. Imagine the stuff that Donald Trump says behind closed doors.
Oh, I don't have to. I mean, we've heard him on tape, right? You can grab women.
Yeah.
And I also was on The Apprentice in 2004. And when I was on The Apprentice in 2004, I was doing, the whole thing was they had to hire comedians to host a benefit. That was the whole task. And they said to us in 2004, Mr. Trump, this is off air, Mr. Trump is going to be here soon. Would you like to meet him? And I said, does he want to meet us? And they said, not necessarily, but we can arrange a meeting. And I said, then I don't want to meet him because I knew that he was a awful person, just particularly to women. I knew that for a fact because I knew women who knew him, and I was a New Yorker. And if you're a New Yorker, you read the tabloids. So I was using, I wanted to be on that show. I didn't consider I was using Trump. He wasn't that show. That was an NBC property. They picked him. Yeah. And he took full advantage of it, obviously. But the point I'm making is like, I didn't want to meet him then. He was terrible then. And those people, so where do they find these people was your question. These people are a dime a dozen. And so the harder thing to find is like a female or a black person who will support Trump. And once you find one of them, those people are making money.
Like if I'm having a conversation with Scott Jennings, which I never have, and I'm sitting across the table where you were, I probably would have handled it the same way you did. But I would say, look, dude, we can talk about policy. We can talk about the accomplishments of the Biden administration. But does a moral compass matter? Does decency matter? Don't you want that in a leader? Right. Or do you want somebody that just attacks? And by the way, the comment that you made about suckers and losers, you're absolutely right on that. We're led to believe by a Scott Jennings or these MAGA Republicans that a 5-star general who's risked his life for this country in public service is just blatantly lying about something like that. These are the people that knew Donald Trump best. These are the people that work for him. It seems like the people that say the nice things about Donald Trump, either they're in it for themselves, like a Marco Rubio, or they've said disparaging things about Trump before, like his vice president, the next American Adolf Hitler. Are these people just complicit? Are they just liars? Or do they believe the stuff that they spew?
Oh, they mostly don't believe it. I mean, Joe Rogan, I don't think believes what he's saying. Joe and I used to be friends. I was on his show, and I know that he doesn't believe a lot of the stuff that he says. I mean, I think.
And why is he supporting Trump?
Why?
Yeah,
because it helps him. Helps him. I think. I mean, he's got most of his audience is men, and MMA and all that. Anything that appears quote tough or traditionally masculine and so on. Also, it's just he's can be a contrarian. I mean, I could go on and on about him specifically.
But think Elon Musk paid him off or no?
No. Joe, first of all, has $100 million deal with Spotify,
Right.
and I'm sure he doesn't trust Elon Musk to fulfill his end of the deal or whatever. Joe is using Elon, I'm sure. More importantly, Elon is using Joe. Joe doesn't need Elon. Elon needs Joe.
But let me ask you this then, because I wasn't aware that you did the Rogan show, but I want to ask you about Kamala Harris, because I do have some criticism.
2019, before COVID, I did it.
Gotcha. Okay. I thought that Kamala should have done the Joe Rogan show, not because I love Joe Rogan, because I don't, but I think that they were a little bit too, what's the word I'm looking for? Conservative, for lack of a better term, with letting her do interviews until later on. She did Bret Baier, which I thought was great. She did Howard Stern, which I thought was great. I thought she should have done more, and I know she was put behind the 8 ball. 3.5 months is not enough time, in my personal opinion, but I thought she should have done Joe Rogan. What's your thoughts on that?
The reason I disagree is only because of the fact that those shows end up being clipped up. So if there would be an inevitable moment in a 2 to 3 hour conversation, which is what he likes to do, where she was going to say something that would have maybe gone viral, and that would have been the thing that most people would have heard. The people that heard the whole show in the context would have seen how brilliant she is, and it would have been an advantage because she's so much smarter than a guy like Joe Rogan, and she would have come off as intelligent and thoughtful, and it would have probably debunked some of the things that are being said about her and so on. But in the end, it would have been the clips that would have probably hurt her, I'm guessing. So I always think of things as clips. It's interesting, that clip you played of me on CNN earlier got seen by millions more people than watched CNN when I was on. So it's always about the clips, whether it's a debate or a show. So I think of things in terms of what's going to be posted on social media and how it's going to reverberate. So I worried about that, but you may be right. It may not have been the case. Maybe she's brilliant throughout, and maybe but I don't think it makes enough of a difference. I don't think that Joe Rogan has such a huge audience that those turned into votes for Donald Trump that weren't already,
I'm not discounting what you're saying. You might very well be right. I just think if you're running for president and I agree with what you said about Harris. I think she's a brilliant woman, very accomplished. We're on the same side there. I just think you got to take the hits and you got to listen. If they're going to cut something up and edit it a certain way, and then if they do that, then the campaign needs to put up the actual clip in the context of it. But I think it might have helped her, maybe not. So let me ask you this question then, and I'll start.
It would have helped her. Let me say I can see that it would have helped her. Would she have won in any state or anything?
I don't know. Probably not. It might have helped her, but I hear where you're going with that. So I try to ask myself the same question, which is, well, why did she lose? I think there are multiple reasons, but I think the number one reason is misogyny, and people can disagree with me until the cows come home. Hillary lost, even though she won the popular vote. Kamala lost, Joe Biden won. I think there's a lot of people in this country that were willing to put aside the liable rapist, the 34 count felon, all the despicable things he said about women, the way he's treated women his whole life, the laundry list, the things he said about John McCain and so on. But they were willing to put that all aside. When I say they, I mean his base of supporters. Yeah. They were willing to put that aside and say, I don't want a woman running the country. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, my short answer is I agree, but I think there's a much more interesting, longer answer, which is if I were to argue from a conservative point of view, conservatives have elected women governors in several states like Mississippi, Kay Ivey, and other states, Nikki Haley in South Carolina, what's her name in North Dakota right now, who apparently is going to be in the cabinet.
The puppy killer.
Yeah, that lady.
Yeah, you're talking about Kristi Noem. Yep.
I think it's important that people understand that women can uphold patriarchy and that black people can uphold white supremacy, like the lieutenant governor of North Carolina or unfortunately lots of others. And so I absolutely think that was a factor, a huge factor that people did not want to vote for a woman because she's a woman. But as I've been thinking about this and talking about this with people who I vehemently disagree with, I'm changing my opinion just slightly about sexism and racism to define it in a way, because a lot of people are getting so offended that when you or me say you didn't vote for her because she's black or because she's a woman, they're saying that never came into my mind. And here's the thing, Brian, I believe them. I believe that they aren't thinking about black folks or undocumented immigrants necessarily. A lot of them are, obviously. Or women. A lot of them are, obviously. But I believe some of the people who say that. The problem for me as an anti-racist and anti-sexist, and don't get me wrong, I'm plenty racist and plenty sexist. I'm just saying I'm trying not to be. The problem is, and the way not to be is to surround yourself with smart people of color and women, and especially women of color, which I've done. But the different take I have is it's not that you won't vote for women. or that you won't vote for a black person. It's that you don't care about them. You don't think about them.
Right.
That is another definition of sexism. Like,
yes.
I don't care about women's reproductive rights. I'm not a woman, or I don't have daughters, or I'm not worried about abortion. It doesn't affect me. That is another form of implicit, in this case, sexism.
Such a good point. Yeah.
Or racism. Like, I don't care about black people. So black people are so, I mean, Eddie Glaude was so, poignant the other day. He always is. I think what I said on CNN in this other clip about it is, I think that it has a lot to do with racism. It's that racism that is, I don't care about you. I don't care that you feel endangered, that you don't feel like you have access to healthcare, education, and opportunity in general. I don't care that you feel that way. I don't care. I'm not thinking about you. And to me, that's bad. We should care about other people. And every religious philosophy teaches that. And every single good person thinks that, care about the stranger. And we certainly should care about women, whether or not we have daughters. I have 2 daughters. And so some people say, sometimes my feminist friends, and I consider myself that, oh, you can't say you only care about women because you have daughters. And I would say, listen, fair enough. But because I have daughters, I think even more about them. Just the way I don't care about cystic fibrosis because I don't know anybody who has cystic fibrosis, so I don't think about it. But if I did, I would care a whole hell of a lot about it.
Natural reaction. And you make such a good point. When people go into the voter booth, they're not thinking about minorities. They're not thinking about a woman's control over her own body. You're absolutely right. And I think that's really important. If you're just joining us, comedian Pete Dominick, watch him on CNN and watched him for years. And he did a great show for a number of years on satellite radio. So I wanted to ask you, Pete, now about the future.
For God's sakes, plug my daily podcast, Brian.
Let's go. Tell me about your daily podcast. Let's go.
I host a daily podcast, and the most interesting thing, and I'm sure you're experiencing this too, is something happened that I didn't plan for, and now it's more valuable than it would have been had Kamala Harris won to a certain extent. We created a community, and everybody's talking about the importance of community, and obviously humans have been talking about it for forever. It's important for every part that animates all parts of our life. So I built this community through the podcast, and I'd love to have listeners of yours come check it out. So, and lately, I do it every day. It drops at midnight, almost every night at midnight. I do a news segment, and then I interview experts, people who are experts on issues, and a broad range of experts, many of which you now are big stars on TV, like Laura Coates started on my show, and so many others. So I'm really proud of that. I'm a guy who says I don't know a lot. I bring on people who do. That's my show. And accidentally, we created a community, and people, we hang out on Hangouts. We get together in real life. I'm friends with these people. If you need friends, if you're alone, if you're an extrovert, and if you're scared out of your mind right now, we got a place for you at standupwithpete.com.
I love it. If you ever need an expert that's a PhD in attacking MAGA deplorables, let me know. I'll gladly
interview you. I want to get you on the show next week.
I would love to do it. Let's do it, my man. So I hate to be a downer here, but let's talk a little bit about some of the hires that Donald Trump has put in place here just over the course of the last several days. We have a few more minutes left here. Tom Homan, a guy who wants to separate families and deport 20 million people. Yeah. And then when asked, is there a way to switch it up where you don't have to separate families? He says, well, yeah, they can just leave with them. You mentioned Kristi Noem, Marco Rubio. You look at Mike Huckabee. By the way, Pete, Mike Huckabee just said recently in regards to this upcoming election, if Donald Trump loses, quote, it's going to be the last American election that will be decided by ballots rather than bullets. Mike Huckabee is the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Boy, talk about a guy that wants to bring peace into the Middle East, who thinks if Donald Trump lost, in the future, we're going to be talking about elections with bullets. I mean, what do you make?
Wow. This is breaking news to me. He appointed Huckabee.
Yes, he did.
To be
Mike Huckabee, or as I call him, Mike Suckabee, is the U.S. Embassy, official U.S. Embassy cabinet member in Trump's to Israel. Mike Huckabee.
The jokes are going to be all about, this is how the rapture happens. Like, it's Huckabee brings on the rapture, because of course, Christian nationalists or evangelicals, they support Israel because of their end times prophecy coincides with, or has common interest in that part of the planet, Israel, of course. And so seeing that Mike Huckabee has been appointed to bring on the rapture, I would think. And I was on his show all the time. He was on my show a bunch of times. I know him really well in person. Nicest, funniest guy. He's changed, though. His demeanor has changed to be much more cruel in the past, in the Trump years. The bottom line about all those people, most of those people, all of them, is the cruelty is the point, is the policy. So the meaner you can be, the more likely you will be to be appointed. And so in Tom Homan's case, the cruelty that will play out with the removal of undocumented people, you got to have a guy like him doing that. You got to be, even John Kelly, when he was in his former chief of staff, was the head of Department of Homeland Security. Like, he didn't take pride in it. He didn't talk about separating families. Kirstjen Nielsen didn't love doing it either. This guy's going to enjoy it. So appointing people that are really terrible, mean, awful, people that enjoy, unfortunately, there's a certain segment of our population. I often talk about this being the difference between liberals and conservatives to a certain extent. Like, I don't enjoy people suffering, even if I hate them. If I hate you, I don't want you to suffer. But these people, after I was on CNN on Thursday night, I was in the police station on Friday night, Brian, because I got so many threats to my family, threatening to rape my daughters. They want me to suffer. They actively, and this has been my whole career, they actively try to threaten me. They want me to suffer. They enjoy my suffering. I do not, even that guy who called in a rape threat to my daughter, I don't want him to suffer. I don't want to become him. I will never become that. This is who.
Hold on. I just want to go back to what you just said. I'm so sorry that you and your family have had to go through that. That's horrible. So you're telling me after your appearance on CNN Thursday, you're telling me that you received threats, on social media?
All of my appearances on CNN, after every television appearance, after a lot of my social media activity, after my appearance on Joe Rogan in 2019, the worst threats I ever got were as a result of my role in my local school board fight, where I am, as you can imagine, a ferocious, vehemently passionate attack dog against those who would, subject marginalized communities to pain and exclusion and worse. And so as a result of my work trying to get, good board members elected versus these Moms of Liberty people, they targeted my family with an anonymous call to Child Protection Services saying that I was sexually abusing my own daughters, who were then 15 and 17. And police came to my house, and so had to interview my daughters, and they immediately knew I was a well-known person and they knew what it was, but they still had to do it, and it was horrible. And so this is who they are, and this is what they do. We don't do that as a practice, and we aren't okay with it if we find out people who are like-minded do. But that's another reason I hope people will, trust me and find me credible and listen to my work and join our community, because I would rather, this is who I am. People they're going to threaten us. This is what fascism is. I have been subject of fascism many times, because what they do is they threaten you in hopes that you will stop talking, and I will not stop talking. I fear for my family, and I really do. I worry about.
I'm so sorry. You should be. I mean, that's just. I hate to say this, Pete, but I've gone through some similar things that you're going through. I mean, the things that people say about me that are completely untrue on a regular basis. I've just, But when you get threats to your family, like your daughter, like something like that, obviously, you have to take it seriously. I've had death threats in the past, and I've had to take that seriously and take it to court. So sadly, Pete, we have to keep doing what we're doing, though, right? We have to keep the fight.
Especially white men. Like, white men have to do this. And the reason why white men don't do it is because why would you? For what reason? And it makes you uncomfortable, and it puts you in harm's way. So just take the easier way, and don't put your family in danger, and don't put your job in danger. But we stand on the shoulders of civil rights leaders who did. Some were assassinated, and there were a lot of white people who are part of that. If we're the problem, then we have to be the solution as well. And so we have to be in spaces and places where we advocate, where we push back. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So if you let somebody do something, say something, be something, then you're part of the problem. And so I've just always wanted to be the change that I want to see in the world. And, they can threaten me all they want. I've been a small guy my whole life. I've been running my mouth my whole life. I've got my ass kicked a couple times as a result of it. Bring it.
I love that. I love that attitude. And are you originally from New York?
Central New York. I grew up in Syracuse.
That's why. I'm from Connecticut. I'm from the East Coast. I love New Yorkers. I get because the way you guys are, And I'm talking about New Yorkers in general, not the way Donald Trump is. But
I lived in New York City. I came of age. I moved to New York City when I was 18 and came up as a stand-up comedian. And I love it. About the early aughts. I was in New York City on 9/11. I lost friends that day.
I'm so sorry.
I smelled those buildings burning and the people burning in those. And then I went out and protested against the Iraq War because I didn't.
Which you were right about. Which you were 100% right about. And now, by the way, one of Dick Cheney's closest advisors, Mike Waltz, is also Donald Trump's next Secretary of Defense. That's a whole nother can of worms. But I want to close by saying this, and let me just reiterate: I'm so sorry that you and your family have had to go through that. It's absurd. You're obviously an extremely talented guy. You're opinionated, in my opinion, on the right side of history. And I love hearing you, and I love hearing your voice, and it's courageous to continue to do what you're doing, regardless of all the crazy lunatics out there. You're obviously doing something right. If people weren't doing that stuff to you and me, and I don't condone it, I wish it wasn't happening, but if people weren't doing that, then we would be doing something wrong. People want us quiet. And it's interesting because these same people talk about freedom of speech and censorship. Then when they see somebody like you or somebody like me, they want to shut us up.
Yeah, you embody something, which is why I'm kind of attracted to what you're doing, because it's similar. We have a similar style in terms of the fearlessness of it, and this idea that somehow because of our politics we're somehow weak. And so, can I read something and then you can let me go?
Sure.
I can't believe I'm such a hack to fall for a meme because I don't know who wrote this, but I love it. It really speaks to me, and I think it describes you. And I wonder if you feel the same. But it's short. I'm not a liberal snowflake. My feelings aren't fragile. My heart isn't bleeding. I'm a badass believer in human rights. My toughness is in my tenderness. My strength is in the service of others. There's nothing more fierce than formidable, unconditional love. There is not a thing more courageous than compassion. But if my belief in equity, empathy, goodness, and love indeed makes me, or people like me, snowflakes, then you should know winter is coming.
I love that. And I do think that describes me a lot. If people want to call me a snowflake like you for being compassionate and caring about other people and not wanting families to be separated and not wanting to tell women what to do with their bodies and not wanting someone to be the leader of the free world who attacks every single person that disagrees with him, then if they want to call us a snowflake, bring it on, man. We got winter. Bring it on.
I want to work with guys like you now to redefine masculinity and strength in a different way, because the Navy SEAL that comes home after fighting the war and does not confront his demons is weaker than the Navy SEAL who does. It's very hard to confront the horror show that is the life of so many men that are taking their lives, turning to alcohol and addiction, and supporting men like Donald Trump. We need to do better for those men and boys, and I'd be really happy to partner with you on that if you think that's something.
I would love to work with you down the road, and let's talk about that. But you're a really talented guy. I love what you do. Look forward to doing your show. Love to have you back, and let's talk in the future. And I wish you the safety and security for you and your family, my friend, and keep up the great work. And you got to get out here to Vegas.
I will. As much as I hate it, I will.
We'll talk about that. You're not the first person to tell me that. I had Michael Rappaport on once, and he hates Vegas too.
I mean, my only point about Vegas is, how do I say this? It shouldn't exist.
We can talk about that. That's another conversation for another show. Pete Dominick, love what you do, my friend. Appreciate the time and look forward to talking to you soon.
I'm really grateful and flattered that you had me on. Thank you.
Absolutely. Appreciate your time, Pete. Thank you so much. That's Pete Dominick, everybody. Great guy. Love what he does. Yeah, maybe we can connect. I'd love to connect with Pete. I think he's great at what he really is.